There's a common misconception in a lot of circles that the 90s were terrible for horror movies. Well, being a kid from the 90s, I can tell you that is not at all the case. So let's go through each year in the 1990s and pick my favorite horror movie from each year. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Nick here from the Lost River Drive-In, and you guys have really liked me going through these decades and giving you my favorite horror movie from each year in said decade. So I figured, why not do the 90s next? That is the decade that I was born, that I grew up in, and that I probably have some of the most fond memories of my life from. And I thought, let's do it. Why not? I feel like this is my home turf now. I really do feel confident going into this decade. So without further ado, the best horror film of 1990, in my opinion, is Child's Play 2. Now, this is my favorite Child's Play movie. If you guys know me, you know that. This, I feel like, walks the line perfectly, where we finally got Chucky front and center. There's enough of the one-liners that are very memorable throughout this movie, but it is also still a horror movie at the end of the day. And Alex Vincent, much better in this movie. I love Christina Lee as Kyle in this movie. I just feel like this is Child's Play at its best. That's not to say the first movie isn't great, or even the later sequels, but Child's Play 2 is really where it's at, and hands down, it's my favorite horror movie of 1990. So now we're at 1991, and I have to give a shout out to The People Under the Stairs, Cape Fear, and Sometimes They Come Back. But none of those movies are my favorite from 1991. My favorite horror movie is The Silence of the Lambs. Now, a lot of people will argue back and forth about how this is not a horror movie, it's a thriller, it's a mystery, whatever. I mean, whatever subgenre you want to label it as, it's a horror movie at the end of the day. Because a lot of it is truly horrifying, and still going back and watching this movie decades later, it is just as effective and unsettling. Look, it goes without saying the performances in this movie are great. The story is great. And it really does keep you guessing and kind of, keep you on the edge of your seat the first time you watch it. Even still to this day for me at times. But The Silence of the Lambs is one of those movies that burrows into your psyche. And it's a movie that you don't ever truly get away from. I feel like it's one of those movies that you will continue to think about long after you've watched it 15 times. You're still going to think about The Silence of the Lambs. It's always going to be quoted. It's always going to be parodied because it is that important to cinema, especially horror cinema. So 1991 was a good year, but this one came out on top. All right, so now we've reached 1992. And if you know anything about me, you know I'm a huge Evil Dead fan. So you think I'm going to go Army of Darkness, right? I can't. It came out in 1992. And in 1992, I think the greatest horror movie of the 1990s came out. And that is Candyman. Look, this movie is a freaking all-timer for me. This movie is incredible. I mean, you're talking about Philip Glass's score. Iconic. You're talking about Bernard Rose's direction. Iconic. Beautiful. Tony Todd in the lead role with barely any screen time, if you actually go back and look at it. But he is so effective. And this spiritual murderer is so enticing and inviting, and you just can't help but want to talk to him and be like, yes, take me, please. I don't even care, Candyman. Yes, I'll go with you. There's so much about this movie that is so iconic. And the social commentary about this movie, about classism and definitely touching on themes of racism and stuff like that, is really poignant today. And sadly poignant today, and sadly always poignant. But it is just handled so well in this movie. Everything about this movie, the themes, the symbolism, I just cannot get over how incredible this movie is. And like I said, it's sad that a lot of the stuff in this movie from 30 years ago still is so front and center and such a problem nowadays, but it is. And I love Candyman for speaking to that, but for so many more reasons than that. I think this is the greatest horror movie of the 90s. I don't think it will ever be knocked from that spot, in my opinion. So not only the best in 1992, that's the best of this decade for me. All right, now we're at 1993. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say this. I'm probably going to piss somebody off. Not a very strong year, in my opinion. Having said that, there's one movie that kind of stands above all of them for me, and that's The Leprechaun. Look, This movie, when I was a kid, was terrifying, and to all my siblings as well. It actually gave my older brother nightmares. He wouldn't go down to the basement because he was afraid the leprechaun was going to grab his foot from under the staircase. Like, the leprechaun invaded my household and terrified all of us. So as a kid, this movie was really effective to me. But even as an adult now, when I go back and watch it, I just have so much fun with this movie. Is it campy and cheesy and low budget? Yes, yes, yes. But it's got a young Jennifer Aniston, a great over-the-top Warwick Davis, and we don't get enough horror movies centered around, I don't know, leprechauns and St. Patrick's Day and whatnot. So the Leprechaun, even if it's just for nostalgia, is going to take the cake for me in 93. Now we've reached my birth year, 1994. And it kind of sucks that no Halloween movie came out in my birth year. That kind of would have been perfect. But my favorite movie of 94 is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, I know that this is a movie that is incredibly polarizing to Freddy fans. I don't really find many people that are like, yeah, it was fine, whatever. People either really dig this movie or really don't dig this movie. I know there are a few in the in-between, but not many. You live on one extreme or the other with this movie. I'm somebody that really likes New Nightmare. Does it take a while to get going? Absolutely. Should we have gotten more of the entity in the movie? Yeah, it would have been cool. But Wes Craven really brought Freddy back to being scary and really brought him back to being the center of attention, making you wait over an hour to see your monster. That is stuff that you don't see done nowadays, but especially in the mid to late 90s. It was all about the kill. It was all about the one-liners. It was all about the franchising of these characters. Wes Craven kind of stripped it back to its roots. It doesn't hurt that this is Heather Langenkamp's best performance as Nancy Thompson. Of the 3 movies she did, this is her best performance. And I just think that the idea of this movie, the meta nature of it, that was a couple years ahead of its time, I think, actually worked quite well, and it makes you at times appreciate Scream even more, because 2 years later Wes Craven would direct that, and that was really well received. But look no further than Wes Craven's New Nightmare to get your first taste of that from Wes Craven. So again, New Nightmare, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I really dig this movie. All right, now we've reached 1995. And no, guys, Cruel Jaws is not my favorite of this year. All right, I know, might surprise some of you guys, but it's not. Look, you're going to hear a lot of people make the argument that Seven is probably the best from this year. And they're right, objectively speaking. But Seven isn't my favorite of this year. That belongs to Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. And this, just like New Nightmare, is a movie that most people love or hate. And there's not much in between there. Now, I'm not really talking about which cut you prefer or anything like that. I'm just talking Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers writ large. And for me, this movie is rock and roll Halloween. It's everything that I love about Halloween at its best. It's got a super gnarly electronic guitar score in the theatrical cut. It's got some great kills, some super memorable Michael moments. It has arguably the best atmosphere of any of the Halloween movies when it comes to nailing the feeling of October and Halloween. I love Paul Rudd as Tommy Doyle. People say he's overacting, he's over the top. He's doing exactly what they asked him to do, and he does it really, really well. There's so much about this movie that I love. I know that the post-production of it was a total mess, and I know that everybody will defend their cut or, slander the other cut, and that's fine. But as a whole, I think that Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers just freaking rules. And quite frankly, it is one of the only Halloween movies that actually scared me a few times the first time I watched it. That scene with Beth in the bedroom in slow motion with like the noises playing, that freaked me out the first time I watched it. So look, I get it. You love or hate this movie. I'm someone that loves it. All right, 1996. Now I know what a lot of you are thinking that I'm going to pick. A couple years ago I probably would have, but I'm not doing it. My favorite horror movie of 1996 is Hellraiser Bloodline. That's right, I'm going Bloodline. Now look, again, Scream is probably objectively the best, but Bloodline has just grown on me over the years, and I adore this movie. Now, I have read the comments from a lot of you guys anytime I talk about Hellraiser on my channel. Many of you are like, I watched the first one or I watched the first two. I've never really gotten past them. I've never looked deeper into the franchise. Look, I have always maintained the first 4 movies, in their own way, are a blast. They are all worth watching, and I think they're all recommendable films. After that, that's when it gets tricky. But Bloodline is freaking awesome. Look, the period piece, the first and second act of this movie are great. The weakest stuff is the space stuff because, obviously, limited budget, with all the rewrites and reshoots, it just doesn't really work. But luckily, it is the smaller subplot of what is a much larger plot that takes place in the past and then in present day. And I think that all of that stuff works in spades. I think it's incredible. Look, Angelique and Pinhead are freaking incredible. I love this movie. If you guys haven't gotten around to watching Bloodline yet, what are you doing? Watch it. It's worth it. It's my favorite horror movie of '96. And fret not, Scream fans. I will rectify the mistake I made with 1997 being Scream 2. Look, I've told the story before. This was my favorite Scream movie all throughout my teenage years and even in my early adult years until I got a little bit older and I was like, you know what? I prefer the first one to this one. But make no mistake, Scream 2 is incredibly strong. It is a great sequel. It is the type of sequel you wish you could make a lot of the times when it comes to slasher movies. So often, the sequels are just such lesser than. And this one isn't. It plays on a lot of the things the first one did well. It's not as good because the opening is not as strong. But I would say everything else is just as good as the first movie. Aside from the killer reveal too. The first one's got a beat in that. Having said that though, I just think Scream 2 is what you should aspire to do for a sequel to a slasher movie. There's good character development here. We really get to see Sydney come into her own. There's some red herrings. And we really get some loose threads from the first movie answered or followed up on and teased for the third movie. I mean, there's a lot in here. There's a lot of meat on the bone here. It doesn't feel like a sequel that was made simply just to make a sequel. It did feel like there was still something to say and there was places for these characters in this story to go. So Scream 2, 97, without question. Now I have to give a shout out to 1998 before I give my favorite because there's some great movies here. The Faculty is in here. Great movie. Halloween H2O. You guys know how I am about that movie, but a lot of Halloween fans really particularly love that one. Having said that though, my favorite horror movie of 1998 has got to be Bride of Chucky. Look, Bride of Chucky, like Child's Play 2, it's not as good as Child's Play 2, but I feel like it really walks that line well. It's definitely more jokey, but not Seed of Chucky levels yet. I think that Bride of Chucky is kind of like I said with Halloween 6, just rock and roll Chucky. Like it is everything that I loved about being a kid, you know, that era, the music, the styles, the movies, everything about it. Like it just screams my childhood when I watch this movie. It kind of transports me back to that time. Also, I just feel like this is the Chucky everyone knows, like the scarred up Chucky with his bride. Like that's where everyone knows Chucky from now. Not saying you hadn't seen the previous movies, but you just kind of think of that when you think of Chucky. And Bride of Chucky is just iconic in that way. There's a lot about this movie that I find to be Don Mancini's impulses working well. And to close out the 90s, my favorite horror film of 1999, House on Haunted Hill. Look, I watched this movie when I was a kid on like the Sci-Fi Channel, I think, and it scared the shit out of me. There was so much about this movie, the imagery, like the fact that the basement is basically this labyrinth where you could get lost and different ghosts could do different things to you. The place itself would just drive you mad. Then you got the whole mechanism that locks everybody in, so you're pretty much screwed. And then you got that weird black freaking mass of souls coming after everyone, which by the way, the effects look terrible nowadays with that thing, but it still scared the shit out of me as a kid. Look, so much about this movie is amazing, and just like Bride of Chucky and just like Halloween 6, I just feel like it's so rock and roll. It's so alternative. It is so 90s, and as a 90s kid, I feel like I have some bias there, and that's fine. But look, House on Haunted Hill I do think ages really well. I recently watched Return to House on Haunted Hill last October, and I did not care for that one. I felt like that was such a lesser version of everything the first movie did well. So sadly, I don't think we're ever going to get a House on Haunted Hill movie as good as 99's again, but that's fine because we've got 99's, and I think this movie is freaking great. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Scream Factory did a great release of it. It's got a bunch of special features. The transfer looks really good. Definitely worth your money. So those are my favorite movies from each year in the 1990s when it comes to horror. I want to hear down below what your guys's are and why. Also, do you think I'm insane for some of these picks? Or are you like, you know what? That was different. I dig it. Either way, whatever you want to say, leave it down below in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. This is Nick at the Lost River Drive-In, and I am pulling out.